Hey, how's it going? I hope 2024 is off to an amazing start. I know we're just a little ways into it, but I hope things are starting to unfold the way you envision them for this year. Let's make this year your big year. All right, now you know, of course, for me, it's all about sync licensing, getting your music out in front of these millions of eyes and ears. You can land in the charts with one good sync placement, sync fees up front, background royalties, all this exposure. I've talked about it too much, so I'm not going to go on about that part of it. But what I did want to talk about was something that happens all too often. Now, you know how hard it is. It's next to kind of impossible. It's like, playing a lottery, cold calling on music supervisors. Music supervisors are, of course, the people who put the music into shows, movies, and ads. Well, they bring it to the directors and the producers, and then together they sort of work on it and then decide what's going to work. Now, when they are listening to music and they're trying to make a decision of whether something can work or not, you might have an amazing song. You might have produced it incredibly. You might have worked really hard on that. And yet you don't get success. It just keeps failing and failing and failing, and you don't know why. Is it because it's not getting through? That's likely, unless you have a connection, Is it because of something else? There's a myriad of things that you need to know when you're submitting your music for sync licensing that are really, really important. Now, there's a home for every song. There's a place, there's so many opportunities out there. You can get your music into a bunch of things. But one of those things that can stop you in your tracks, and you'll never get feedback from it because they're just too busy. They're inundated with music, and that's just from their go-to people, let alone everybody, out there who's got a record out. So what you want to do is you want to understand what are some of the things before you try to get your music out there that are working in sync, and what are the things that don't work. One of those big tips is making sure your vocal is at the right level. A lot of people think that the idea is you do a mix the way you kind of like it, and then you do a vocal up mix because that's just sort of what you heard works on radio or the way you think people like them. So people do half a dB up, maybe once in a while a dB and a half. You're trying to get your music into a show, movie, or ad, and you're wondering why it's not working. And of course, you're not getting any feedback. Now, imagine going year after year after year trying to do this, and only much later, a decade later or something, finding out, oh, all I had to do was do this one tweak, make this one single change, and it would have been much more viable, a contender. So the vocal level is so important because if you dominate the mix too much with the vocal, it adds, for one, too much character that can take away from what they're trying to convey on the screen. The other thing is, if they decide to use your track with the vocal in it while there's dialogue, generally in between the dialogue, but say it's low in the mix, it's going to come across as competing against the dialogue. And you don't ever want that to happen. So the way you want to mix your music is you want to do a regular mix, you want to do your radio mix that you normally do, and you want to do a sync mix. The sync mix means taking the vocal and dropping it back just a little bit into the music. Now, I'm not talking about changing the relationship between the vocal and the music. I'm not talking about burying it in there. I'm literally just talking about make it more of a flat soundscape so that the vocal is equal with the music, so that it sort of is blended and weaved into all the instrumentation. And the way to do that is, of course, take your fader and just turn it down. Done, right? We're good. Not necessarily. So you may find that when you turn your vocal down a little bit, all of a sudden it may feel like something's changed, right? With the music, not just the volume of the vocal, but something's changed in the music. How do you get around that? And how do you make that vocal sound the way it was sounding without, turning it up? So there's a few tricks. One of those is when your vocal goes back, you're going to probably want to give it a little bit more presence. The volume's lower, but you can get the presence back to give it the same impact. One way to do that, simple way, is EQ. You just kind of EQ the mid-range up a little bit. Make sure it's got more presence in it. Give it a little more high end maybe take off a little of the bottom end. Another one is compression. So you could compress your vocal a little bit more, change the attack and the release. Maybe you're going to slow the attack down, speed the release up a little bit to give it a little bit more, in your face. It'll sound more in your face that way. You may change the compressor style. You may go from like a opto to a FET compressor. Another one is you might want to change the the way the reverb and the delays work with your vocal. Now, a trick to give your vocal presence without it sounding obvious is put a really short delay on it, a stereo delay. So you can put 25 milliseconds on one side, 50 milliseconds on the other side, and blend into taste. And usually what you'll do is you'll pull that delay up and you'll pull it up just till you kind of hear it, and then drop it back just a hair. And you kind of won't really hear it, and you're wondering, well, that's not really doing anything. But then hit the mute button, and you'll probably discover that, oh, all of a sudden the vocal doesn't have the same presence that it does with that short delay. You can go further with that. You can EQ the delay or the reverb that's actually on the vocal, for example, is put a plugin, like an EQ plugin, after the delay or the reverb, and EQ it to be much more mid-range. So take some of the high end and the low end off of the actual effect and emphasize the mid-range of it. And the mid-range is going to give that vocal, because your vocal sits in the mid-range, it's going to give it more presence while retaining that same relationship with the music and so on. So anyway, there's a bunch of other studio tricks. Don't have time to get into that in this video, but I just wanted to get across the idea of making sure that your vocal isn't dominating your mix when you're submitting it for sync. So always remember to do a sync mix, okay? And leave me a comment below. Let me know, how do you approach vocals? I'm really curious. I read every single one, I respond to them all, and I'm really curious, like, do you tend to mix your vocal up? Do you mix it down? And I know that your genre of your music's gonna change that, right? If you're pop, your vocal's up, and maybe you're ambient and it's down. Punk rock, you're in the guitars somewhere. So let me know, I'm really, really curious. And otherwise, keep in mind, do a sync mix every time. And that way you've checked one thing off that you know that is going to not just get rejected because it was like, oh, too bad, great song, great mix, but vocals just too loud, and then you'll never hear about it, okay? Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you on the next one.